Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad we're all here today. We're going to be talking about career laddering. Before we move forward, just want to welcome everyone to this webinar series that is hosted by the PACE division, which is our post-secondary adult and career education division here at ACTE. So one of the main topics that we're constantly hearing about is career laddering. So we're going to discuss that today. But before we do that, we have our sponsor, which is the Floor Covering Education Foundation. I just have a brief clip to play from them, and then we can get going.
This is Brandon, and this is his friend David. Brandon and David graduated from high school together. David was off to a four-year college, but Brandon just wasn't sure. That path just didn't feel right. Knowing Brandon was creative and loved to work with his hands, a counselor suggested training as a flooring craftsman. So while David was studying, partying, and racking up debt, Brandon was getting hands-on training at his local technical college. Before too long, he was working and making real money. A few years later, he's even managing his own crew. Brandon really enjoys his career. Every day is different. And he's making people really happy, which makes him really happy. David, well, he's still working on his degree. If you know someone who would make an excellent flooring craftsman and could use a scholarship to help with training costs, request the Floor Your Future Advisor Kit at flooryourfuture.com/advisor.
Okay, so now let's get back to business. So we have four great people with us today. We have Dr. Pam Carter, who's the VP and Dean of the School of Business at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Say, hey, Pam. Shout out.
Hi, everyone.
We have Dr. Brittany Baptiste Williams, who's the State Director of CTE at Louisiana Community and Technical Colleges.
Hello, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Right. We have Alberto Urbino, who's the Dean of Materials Science and Smart Manufacturing at Houston Community College.
Hi, everyone.
And we have Richard Ross, who's the Associate Professor of CTE with the Department of Business at Valley City State University.
Good morning to good afternoon to everybody.
All right. So as I said, as we all know, we're talking about career ladder and post-secondary CTE. Why is career laddering important? This is to anybody. It could be our speakers or anybody. Why is career laddering, why is this an important topic?
Well, I guess I probably have been on the ladder the longest, seeing that I'm the most oldest. And I actually got in through education through the back door, and I've been up and I've been down this career ladder. And it's important because it sets in place where we want to go with our career. I like to really talk in terms of career latticing, and I'll talk about that later on, because I've gone up and down the ladder, but I've moved sideways more than anything. So career laddering, like I said, it sets who we are in our career.
Thank you. And I guess we'll start there. Maybe we'll start with you. If our panels can each briefly share with us your professional path.
I will start out then. I started in construction with my dad's construction business, and then I moved into retail. And when the retail business decided they didn't need management, I got into education, worked education for 3 years on post-secondary, which was the most fun I've had in my life. I quit when my wife wanted to become a teacher, and I became a stockbroker, and I was miserable. The money was there, but the hours and what I wanted to do. So I got back into higher education, or got into higher education, and been into higher education now for 31 years.
You. Other panelists, tell us a little bit about your professional path.
I can go next. So my first career in CTE was actually as a welder. I'm a product of career and technical education. I took 2 years of high school welding classes, and shortly after I graduated high school, I started working in the oil and gas industry here in Southeast Texas, and did so for about 6 years, and then decided that I wanted to continue on with my education. So that's when I first became an educator and was a welding instructor for several years. And even after I finished my undergraduate in engineering, I decided that I really liked education, particularly the career and technical. So I decided to stay in education, and then moved on to be a welding faculty at several community colleges in the region, and later on had the opportunity to be the director of several workforce programs, and just kind of continued on the progression there from program director to executive director, and now to a dean over the community college, or Houston's community colleges manufacturing programs here in the Houston area. So just, from welder all the way up to dean, where I am now.
Thank you.
I'll go next, and I'll talk a little fast because I have a lot of stops. So I started out in government contracting in my professional industry career. I had gone to undergrad and didn't complete, and ended up, while I was in government contracting, getting a certificate in procurement and contracting, then decided to finish my bachelor's while I was working. Once I finished, I ended up getting my MBA full-time with a fellowship, and had a co-op the second year. Didn't look for a job, a typical MBA job, because I thought I would stay with the co-op, and that didn't end up working out. And I ended up answering an ad for Northern Virginia Community College, Office Systems Technology assistant professor, got the job and absolutely loved it, and would have stayed, but budget cuts in Virginia that year. So it looked like I was going to lose my job. I ended up getting a PhD because I loved education so much. And I thought, well, I'd have more opportunities. After my PhD, I ended up working at research-oriented schools for a while, decided I needed a break, and so did some consulting for a while. After not quite 2 years of consulting, I decided I wanted to learn more about the totally online space in education. So I got a job at North Central University, which is now part of National University. I worked there for a while. At that point, I was an assistant dean. I started there as a curriculum director and ended up as an assistant dean. And from there became dean. I left and became a dean at Community College of Philadelphia. I loved community college life and decided to go back. What I like about it, it's open access. It's giving diverse groups of students, at least in the areas I have been working in, locations, opportunities. So worked there 6 years as dean, and then came across an opportunity for my current position, which is vice president and dean at University of Maryland Global Campus, which is predominantly online and is open access, even though we are part of the University of Maryland system. So it has a lot of the same values as community college, but it extends it to the bachelor, master's, and we have a doctoral program at my school.
Thank you. Brittany.
Oh, yes. Before I share my journey, I'd just like to go back to the question on why career laddering is important. And for me, it's because of representation. We don't see enough leaders of color in administrative positions, especially working in career and technical education. So how did I get where I am? I like to use that pop culture phrase, I started from the bottom, now I'm here. I was working in graduate school, and our program coordinator saw my work ethic and talent and said, you know, the chancellor at one of the local community colleges really takes an interest in mentoring young Black females. I think you should go and ask her to be your mentor. And so I did, and she gave me an unpaid internship for a summer. And so, mind you, this was after graduate school, had an unpaid internship, and that led me to a part-time job with the community college. And then I got certified to teach at their workforce development office. And then from there, I got on full-time working in career services. And so I worked as a career advisor, and then as an academic advisor, and then I was an instructor for communications, and then I worked with the TRIO and Upward Bound program, and just continued to work up as far as I could. When a position became available at our state office, I applied and worked under the state director, and she mentored me. And when she retired, I applied for the state director position and was granted that or awarded that position. But I always like to tell people, take those unpaid positions because they pay off. I worked my way up 15 years later, and I've accomplished a lot in that short amount of time.
Thank you. You guys are bringing up so many issues about this career laddering. And I think one of the biggest pieces is everybody's journey is their journey. Some of you started as we have with Alberto, we started as a welder, then became an instructor, then a dean, then we have some faculty, and everybody's kind of doing different things to get where they are, but the skills that you gain along the path are helping you where you currently are, right? So I think this goes kind of to the next question is, what is the most important thing you did to reach this part of your journey?
I'll start. I feel very strongly about this question. I would say the most important thing I did was stay true to my values and listen to my gut. I ended up going to, let me go back in my MBA program, even to the point where my co-op, where I was working in compensation at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, and emphasis on compensation. And so then when I knew what my job offer should be, because I worked in compensation, and it was well below what it should have been. Right. And I could have stayed, and everyone told me, well, you'll be able to move up quickly, but I just didn't think that was right. And that ended up being what got me into higher education, post-secondary education. If I had not stuck to my values, I would have never taken that path. And that has been the case all along. After I got my PhD, there was an expectation to have this research career. And to this day, I have people who are like, what are you doing? Why did you do this? You could have been doing X, Y, Z, but that's not what I wanted to do. And so, I think it's really important that you listen to what's important for you and your family, and you stick to what feels good in terms of listening to your own intuition and gut and what's best for you and your situation.
That's some really good advice. Anyone else want to chime in?
I like to follow up with that. I like to say I walked in my own authority. One of the things I'm very good at knowing what my strengths are and where my talents are. And from that is, how do you set a value to that? I know what I'm good at and how much of an asset that could be for an agency or a company. And so I try to sell myself. And one of the things that I do is when I talk to others is, how can I benefit you, but also how can you benefit me? It should be a relationship that's reciprocal, but also knowing what your value is and what you can bring to the table and walking in that confidence and authority.
So what I'm hearing from you is a big piece of this laddering is getting to know who you are, getting to know what matters to you, and making decisions around those values. And your gut, right? Listening to yourself and how you're feeling. A lot of times people say I had a mentor that used to say, Sophia, the feelings are not the facts, but they matter and they help move you forward into where you're going to go next. Do anyone else want to chime in on the most important thing you did to reach this part of your journey?
I can go next. I think one of the most important things for me was just being someone who's open to learning new things. There's so many things in education, especially transitioning from the K through 12 system to the post-secondary system, that there's so many, there's just so much to learn, from the curriculum to the instruction to the finance to the HR and the management, that just a willingness to learn new skills, a willingness to volunteer a lot of the times to do things that perhaps there weren't a lot of volunteers for, really helped me to grow, to learn more, and to be able to apply what I had learned. And just as importantly, to demonstrate to my supervisors that I'm willing to take on additional projects and willing to take on additional responsibilities, so that when new opportunities do come up, that you're one of the first people that they think about, about kind of going to and providing this potential for growth within the institution.
I will add my 2 cents in and say that Dr. Carter is exactly right. It is about being true to yourself. I've had many jobs inside and outside education, and I've always come back because education was what was best for me and my family. So thank you, Dr. Carter, for stating that.
Great. Okay, so, we sort of hinted at this question. We went around it, possibly how advancing in your careers. A lot of you said you took opportunities. Some were not paying, some were volunteering and doing different things to get experience in certain areas. Are there any other professional development opportunities you found helpful as you were kind of laddering and figuring out your next step moving forward?
Going to chime in. The most important thing that I've learned when it comes to career latticing, okay, and I've been the chair of a department, but I was better at teaching than I was at managing. Customer service, because it all comes down to how you talk to your potential students or your students in the customer service or different states, is probably the most important professional development that I have delved into, was how to be open in my field to get people to learn from me.
Mhm. Thank you. Anyone else? Any professional development opportunities you found helpful along this path?
I think for me, it was really just going to different conferences, whether or not they're directly related to my role at the institution, but just learning as much as possible about post-secondary, career and technical education, student affairs, academic affairs, because those were not just opportunities to learn more about our craft and our area, but also to be able to develop that professional network of contacts that we have, right? So maybe some of the folks that we meet at some of these conferences may have a direct and specific experience on something that we haven't yet come across, but when we do come across that, we kind of have that professional network to be able to rely on and kind of pick each other's brains, if you will, on best practices that would help us in whatever situation we may find ourselves in. But because we have that professional network, because we've attended so many professional development opportunities and network opportunities, we can kind of fall back on that network to get some best practices and new ideas and advices when we need them.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of jokingly say, you mean besides being a next level fellow?
I was about to say, if that wasn't mentioned, ooh.
But I do want to emphasize, what I most appreciated. There were a lot of things I appreciated about being a fellow, but one of the things I most appreciated, besides having the mentor that I had, was the opportunity really to reflect through the different assignments. When I started as a fellow, I was the dean at Community College of Philadelphia. And it was really through reflecting and really focusing on what I wanted and what I felt about leadership and how did that relate to what I was doing in my career. Well, by the time I'm ending, shortly thereafter, I was the vice president and dean at University of Maryland Global Campus. And, I don't really think I would have been, in the open mindset to even be considering new things, because I was, happy with what I was doing at CCP. And but it just really made me reflect. And for any professional development opportunity, I think it's really important for folks to take the time to reflect on what does this mean for me, as opposed to just going through it.
Yeah, and I will just echo what Dr. Carter said. I think the national fellowships, whether that's with ACTE or that's with advanced CTE, both have really great professional development opportunities and fellowships, but it allows the participants to sharpen their skills, expand their network, and really develop that support system that they can lean back on later on. One of the things Alberto talked about was being able to network with others at conferences and bounce ideas off of one another. I can attest to that. I think a lot of things that I'm doing currently, I wouldn't have considered if it weren't for those people in the fellowship program who may have recognized something in me that I didn't recognize in myself, or said, you know what, you're working on this. I think it will be more impactful if you reached out and you worked with this next person, or you considered looking at this opportunity. So just taking advantage of those national fellowships with us national organizations.
Thank you. We've mentioned the term mentor came up a couple times. What is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? Have you ever heard the two separate terms? Can one of my folks kind of describe what is the difference between the two and what's been your experience with either one?
I would say a mentor is really focused on that relationship between the mentor and the mentee, and the scope of what happens there is really about facilitating, advancement and growth and discussion between the mentor and the mentee. I would say a sponsor, it goes further. A sponsor is all about, they know about you, and they will advocate for you in other settings when you're not around. Right, the sponsor, like they're going to sponsor you and advocate for maybe opportunities. They're in the room where decisions are being made, and they're putting you forth as someone potentially who should get some opportunities that are being discussed. So I think the sponsor goes beyond that just initial mentor-mentee relationship, and actually that person is also advocating for that person that they're working with and have that relationship with in settings to get them to advance and put them in front of other people so that other people can recognize that this is a person that they should pay attention to.
Have any of you, I know if you've been in the Next Level Fellows program, you've had a mentor. Have any of you had a sponsor or a mentor that's turned into a sponsor that you can talk about how that relationship evolved, or how someone came in your life and became a sponsor, or how could you find a sponsor? How does that really work?
I actually had a sponsor that got me hired as a faculty member at this university that turned into a mentor. So they were the one that highly recommended me to take this position, but at the same time, once I got the position for the next 20 years.
Good, yourself?
One, please, if you could mute your mic.
I got the email from Kelly.
That happens to be my boss.
Professors that I'm waiting on to get their evaluations back, because I think we had a June 30th date originally.
Okay.
Well, that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. That happens to be my boss. So he will hear about it tomorrow.
Good.
So anyways, Dave became my mentor. And I just want to say something about mentors. Even a bad mentor, we have something to learn from. I think as educators, we got to be so focused on the improvement of ourselves, that we don't look at the bad in others. So even, and I've had bad mentors before, and I've learned from them because I've been so focused on myself and how they help myself. So if anything, I've learned how not to do something from a bad mentor. We do have to keep that focus too. So I'm going to let the others speak. I've taken too much time.
No.
And I thought it was interesting that Rick said that his sponsor turned into a mentor, and I
Right,
look at it
usually
just
the
the
other way.
reverse. I think the mentor, once you have that established relationship, then they become a sponsor and they're able to advocate for you. A lot of times with the mentor and mentee relationships, some of them are set up outside by third-party agencies. And so once you connect with people, you learn their work ethic, you see their value, you see where their interests are, then you can connect to them on a greater level and see how you can impact their future and sponsor them for other opportunities.
I just wanted to chime in and say that I've had the opportunity to have both. And, those sponsors really, really help professionally to be able to grow within your area, because if you don't have those sponsors, it's kind of hard sometimes to get opportunities. Depending on the institution, some of these positions are highly sought after. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of folks that applied to it, but sponsors really do help. But my experience has been that the way to be able to earn the recognition and respect of those sponsors is really just kind of like I had mentioned before. For me personally, is really going above and beyond and volunteering and helping them to achieve their goals. So that way they can see that you would be an asset not only to them, but to the institution, because you have those shared values that that particular institution is trying to achieve for them.
So it seems that you want to speak.
I was just going to say just one more thing about that. I've always been surprised. I've had sponsors but I didn't know it until after the fact. Right. So oftentimes, I don't know that I've had any mentors that ended up that I knew about, being a sponsor. But the way the sponsors that I know about, it was just from them watching me work and watching what I did. I didn't even have a special relationship with them. And later on, I found out, after some opportunities had availed themselves, that the things that this person was saying had been saying. So you never know. I mean, I think obviously there's no one path to, having sponsors, but I will say folks are always watching.
I think they definitely are. So all of you seem to have had mentors and sponsors. Have you ever been in the place where you were able to be a mentor or a sponsor to someone else? And what did that look like?
When I was dean at CCP, I had the opportunity to hire an assistant dean. And one of the candidates I had was, and she knows this, was not quite, I would say, as experienced as other candidates on paper. But when I interviewed with her, she just seemed like a go-getter, and she just all this potential. And I decided that's the person I'm hiring, and I will mentor her because I think she's going to be great. And so that was the start of our relationship at work, and it worked out. I served as her mentor. I think she would say that, and it was really a good experience because the mentee gets obviously things out of it. As a mentor, it brought back things that I hadn't thought about in a long while. It helped solidify, kind of my values, and it was interesting to hear her take on things. And so, that would be my, most recent experience. But, I think everyone has an opportunity to serve as a mentor. And if you think about it, right? And all kinds of different ways. And so, if you haven't, I strongly suggest it, because you get as much, if not more, out of it than the mentee. It's really rewarding and a great experience, even for tuning into your own self.
Thank you, Brittany. I see you shaking that head, shaking that head.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Carter. And I do want to add, for the last 17 years at Valley City State University, I have been one of the faculty in teacher improvement and teacher evaluation. So yes, I serve as a formal mentor to usually most of the faculty between the years of 1 and 3 years at the university when we work on their evaluation and improvement plans. And what that has done is energize myself to the point where I want to reach out and find ways to become a better professor or a better employee, so that when it comes time for my evaluations, I'm putting to practice what I've been mentoring. So it does create rejuvenation and energy in your own work too. So don't discount it, anybody.
I agree with Rick. I just believe iron sharpens iron. And so the more that a mentee questions or are asked about things, it helps you reflect and think about how you can be more effective or more productive in your role and help them in their roles as well. I think it's learning on both sides of the mentor and the mentee.
I wanted to add too that I always share with our faculty that I see myself as a mentor to the faculty, and the faculty are kind of a mentor to our students. So we're kind of in this circular relationship, if you will, where we're all kind of learning and from each other, but also helping each other out, like a lot of my colleagues already mentioned, because I really think that, especially in career and technical education, particularly in the trades, we get a lot of instructors that are great plumbers and welders and machinists, but don't have a lot of kind of experience teaching others. So certainly being able to help those folks transition from industry over to education is very important, not only for their success, but obviously for the success of our students. And then later they can themselves serve as mentors to other faculties and new faculties that are starting in a similar role as they did.
Thank you. This is a big piece. And what I'm finding is you're different parts of your ladder, but it doesn't mean that you can't stretch down and pull up as you're also pulling up in the same way, right? So, we've heard this term and it's come up more and more, and that's imposter syndrome. So an imposter syndrome is this idea that you feel like you don't belong somewhere, even though you have the education and you have the experience to be in that particular place. Have any of you ever experienced that through your career?
I'll hop in and share. So I think early on when I first got to the state level, I did feel and it was because I had a lot of people looking at me saying, you haven't taught any CTE. You aren't CTE. How can you be a CTE administrator? And my response has been, you can't tell me where my passion is. Just because I haven't taught something does not mean I can't have the passion for it. I can't learn about it. I can't advocate for it. And so it just came with, again, understanding my values, understanding my passion, my purpose, what my strengths, what I could bring. I think it's helped with that process.
Anyone else experienced it?
I don't think that I've personally experienced that syndrome, but perhaps like others around me, maybe my colleagues or maybe supervisors that I don't directly report to may sometimes feel that way. I think that's just a reality sometimes. And I can recall at my first institution where I transitioned from faculty over to administrator, there was a lot of questions as to whether a former welding faculty could handle the responsibilities of an administrator at that level. So, I think sometimes it's not just whether we ourselves feel that we have imposter syndrome, but perhaps some of those folks around us as well.
And learning how to deal with that, right? Because no one's perfect. Everyone is growing in their positions, right? And I don't think anybody has arrived. And if somebody has arrived in their position, maybe it's time to go to another position, right? So moving right along, what is the hardest decision you've ever had to make in your career so far?
I can answer that one very easily. I was a high school marketing teacher for 4 years, and my wife got an opportunity to study her master's degree in special education. So I quit teaching to become a stockbroker. And I'm glad I did it because it got my wife her master's degree in special ed. But at the same time, it was a miserable 2 years for me, dealing with that, going back to that part of business. So the toughest decision was leaving what I truly loved. But then again, I got back to it because I truly loved it and I was true to myself, as Dr. Carter has said, that I needed to be back in education. So that is my toughest one.
Can I answer my easiest decision before I answer my hardest?
Yes, yes.
So early on in my career, it was easy to participate in all of the professional development, to go to every business meeting, go to every webinar, every training, everything that was offered to a person. I took advantage of it. I volunteered for every committee that I could, every task force, learning to teach and advise, I did it. But as I got further along in my career, and then things evolved in my personal life, I got married, I had kids. Then I had that hard decision of returning back to work after delivering children. For me, that was a tough decision. Now, how do I balance these new responsibilities, these new passions and love, with things? Work had always been my first love, but now I have these little people looking up to me.
Right.
And so it became very difficult and very hard because now it's a balancing act. And I think it's something that a lot of women face, and even men, when their families grow, and wanting to be there for that next generation, be there for their legacies, and then still holding up on the professional side with their work obligations.
I think my most difficult decision was when I decided to transition from secondary to post-secondary CTE. And that was difficult because there's a need in both. And there's a lot of great students in both of those areas, at the high school level, but also at the technical college and community college level. There's great students and there's great need there. What helped me to make my final decision to go from teaching high school to teaching at the community college was really me coming to the realization that I would be able to impact more students by teaching at a community college, because not only could I impact the students there, but all of our dual enrollment students, and to help those ISDs really kind of align their CTE curriculum to where they would stack into either the community college or the technical college, whereas working in secondary, I wouldn't be able to necessarily influence the CTE at the community college or technical level. But like I said, it took me about a week or so to come to that decision once I was presented the opportunity to move to a community college. So it wasn't a very decision to make, but ultimately I think I made a very good decision.
So that was the hardest. Now, since we're doing hardest and easiest, what was the easiest decision you had to make in your laddering or in your career so far?
I think for me, it was really the easiest decision was being able to transition from faculty to administrator, because the way I view it, kind of like I've already mentioned, is really the impact that one person can have, right? You can certainly have a big impact in the classroom, but if you want to have a greater impact on a greater number of students, you really have to move into some type of administrative position to be able to impact even more students. So I think for me, the easiest decision was to decide to transition from being a faculty at an institution to being an administrator.
Thank you. Pam, Rick? Oh, Rick,
I'm going to say
Mhm.
I've had a lot of easy decisions. It hasn't been difficult, but the one that I treasure the most was getting involved with ACTE. At one point, I was the executive director for North Dakota ACTE, and I do not regret any of the time that have spent at national or regional conferences or state conferences with ACT or holding meetings. So it's really been a boost to my career, being involved with ACTE, and one of the decisions I made when I look back now, I think, 15 years ago, that was probably the best thing I could have done for Rick as far as being a CTE teacher.
Pam?
I would
Hardest-
say
Yes.
my easiest is pursuing a career in post-secondary education. It's like once I started at Northern Virginia Community College, I knew this was just it. So that was by far the easiest decision.
The hardest, the most difficult?
Oh, so yeah, so this is interesting now that I'm thinking about the juxtaposition there. So I was at an institution, shall remain nameless, and I was being required to do things I just did not believe in. And there was no way for me to get around it. The person who was requiring it was a very powerful person on campus. There was nowhere I could go. And so I just quit because I just refused to do it. So I quit without having another job in place. That definitely was the hardest decision I made. I don't necessarily recommend it, even though it worked out for me. I ended up, as soon as people heard I was not working, I start getting consulting work pushed my way. And so I ended up being fine. But that definitely was a hard decision.
Mhm. So there's a lot in making the career decisions. It's not just about this is the next level. It's also about everything that's happening in my life, everything I'm valuing, I'm loving, not liking. It's very challenging. So what do you think? How long should someone stay in a position, do you think? You know, each of you spoke about the different positions you went to, you know, what you did, you know, that type of things. But if you were giving advice, how long do you think someone should stay in a position?
I have been in higher education for 31 years, but I'm going to tell you, I've probably have had a dozen positions in higher ed at the same institution. And my piece is, whenever I get bored with a job and I quit professional development and I quit trying to push myself forward to learn more about it, then it's time to move on. I don't know if you can put a year on it, but I can put on, you can tell when a person is just a paycheck and just sitting at their job, and you can also tell when somebody is striving to improve at their job. So once you quit that striving to improve, I think it's time to reassess your values and beliefs in that position.
Yeah, I like to follow up with that to what Rick said and thinking about improvement, because with improvement comes change. And true change isn't seen in 1 year or 2 years. You really need about in my opinion, 3 to 6 years for you to see true change and improvement, especially if you are working and striving to improve something, create an initiative and see it to full term, see it sustained, maintained, 3 to 6 years.
I agree with Dr. Williams. 3 to 6 years, I think would probably be the numerical value to give to a position where I think, me personally, I've started to feel comfortable within a position during that time frame. You kind of best learn what's expected. You learn best practices for that specific role. So I certainly agree with that. I think the other thing to consider too is whether or not you want to move up to the next position, right? Because not everyone has the same kind of aspirations as far as how far they want to get into administration or career and technical education. So just kind of knowing yourself and knowing how far you want to go, because obviously, as the saying goes, to those who a lot is given, a lot of it is expected, right? So there's certainly more responsibilities the higher that you go in administration. And then the other thing is just coming to the realization. I speak to my colleagues here locally, but also across the nation. And I think sometimes we're kind of looking for that ideal position, but there's plus and minuses to everything. So just coming to the realization that every position is going to have plus and minuses, and there's not a perfect position. So yeah, that's something that's kind of helped me to come to that realization myself.
I think it's funny because my original response was, oh, it could vary, in terms of time period, which I still agree with that. And I agree with what folks are saying in terms of, when it starts feeling stale or unfulfilling, or you feel like you've accomplished what you meant to, what was meant to accomplish, and you're sitting around thinking, well, what next? I don't even see anything that I want to do next in this particular position. But at the same time, I'm just thinking about it. And since I've been in post-secondary education, I think the range of my how long I've stayed on a job is 3 to 6 years.
So you fell right within that block that everybody's saying. But I think it also goes into being true to yourself as well. Like, no one is saying stay in something that's abusive or harmful to you personally, or, there all those other things considered, as part of the decision to stay as well. So if you were in an institution, right, and you wanted to say you were at that point and there wasn't opportunities to move, would you stay, or would you create something, or would you move, or have you ever been in that kind of space where, say, Rick just advertised his job to someone on this call and told them that they can get his job, he's getting them ready for his job. But what if that wasn't possible? What would you do?
I would say step outside of your comfort zone and seek employment elsewhere. I know in previous positions when I became disinterested, and I felt like I could no longer contribute because I had peaked or reached my maximum potential in that role. I would speak with senior administrators at the college. And then if they didn't feel like it was something that they could move on, I sought employment elsewhere. And folks don't want you until somebody else wants you. And then it's let's negotiate, what me staying here looks like. But you have to take that risk and take that opportunity. That goes back to knowing your value and knowing your strengths and interests and abilities.
All right. So
And one thing I'd also recommend is, at least what I've always done, even when I was happy and, things are great and I'm, not looking, I still would keep up with what are the jobs out there, right? I'm always looking, not necessarily because I'm thinking to leave, but I'm just always curious about what's happening out there. And so when you do find yourself in that kind of situation that you hope not to find yourself in, you at least are prepared in terms of having been thinking, oh, that was interesting, or that might be something to look at in the future. Or, so I think you have to always be kind of on the lookout for, what the context is that you're working in. What's the context of the industry you're in? What potential career ladders would you might want to take if you were going to make a move? And if you're always kind of having that in the background, if you do find yourself in an unfortunate position where you're thinking, I need to make a move and I need to make it quickly, you're at least that much more prepared in terms of what direction you might want to move in.
So that's a good piece of advice. Anyone else? Any other advice you'd give someone that wanted to move up?
I was just going to add to Dr. Carter and Dr. Williams that if you have the opportunity to move up from your current position to a higher position, even though it may not be at the institution that you're in, certainly consider making the change, because if it's going to be a promotion, then it's going to continue to allow you to grow as a professional within the discipline. There's so many things that go into a position at the institution that you're at, right? I mean, the position may not open up. There may be a sponsor that's sponsoring someone else for that position. So there's so many things that can go into the finalists for a particular position, especially where the position is very competitive. So if you have the opportunity to get a higher position somewhere else, I would certainly consider it because, like I said, there's so many variables that go into it locally at the institution that you're at.
You know, add something too. This actually goes to Rick's point about latticing. Sometimes too, you want to look at where you are in your career and what skill sets you might want to build on, right? And let that help define what your next step was going to be, right? And sometimes that means it won't be necessarily up, it might be across, because you'll get this other skill set. And then once that skill set is, combined with what you have, then maybe you're looking to go up. So I think also, kind of taking your own inventory and saying, hey, in terms of how do I develop myself to get to where I ultimately want to go, what kind of positions will help me develop the skill sets that I need?
But I think going into that line of thinking as well, sometimes we apply for jobs, and more women than men, studies show, will apply for jobs that every single thing on the job, what they want, you feel you need to be able to do at 100% level, right? While they say in the research that the men, 70% of it, they'll go for it, right? So that's also a piece of it too, is when we go and look for positions, there might be one or two things on there that you can work on and get to being really good at, but don't cut yourself out of an opportunity because there might be one thing or two things on there that you're like, I'm not the best at, or I'm not sure exactly how, right? Because then you won't advance because you'll be taking the same jobs where you're doing the same things and just moving your skill set from one place to another instead of moving your skill set to a higher rung on the ladder, right? So that's something as well that comes out. So people say, okay, somebody wants to advance in their career. Is it the education? Is it the experience? Is it the networking? How do those three play or not play together? Education, experience, and networking when you're trying to advance.
You know what, I'm going to step in on this one. At a younger age, the education was so important to me so that I could get into that position and be able to rise. As I ventured into the position with more years, then it became the latticing, the side-to-side movement, or the other skills and the experience. And then finally, about 15 years ago with ACTE, and I also sit on the North Dakota Career Tech Education Administrators. I'm the only four-year college out of 6 colleges that sit on that committee, but I've networked myself so that if something should happen, and in that networking, I do on a very regular basis apply for jobs, some jobs that I have no intention of taking. And the reason why I do that, because I don't know that job. So I may, get an interview and they may offer it to me and all of a sudden, yeah, that is what I want to do. I don't know that at that point. However, for the last 28 years, I've turned them all down. So as my career developed, at first the education became important. I actually worked on my PhD and I was one class and a dissertation short from getting it. I've got my master's degree, and it's really interesting that it's all in K-12, nothing in higher education. And I'm here because of networking, education, and an experience. All three of them play a valid role, but I can tell you, if you're just starting out, that education is so valuable, so that you can show them, hey, I've got it. The experience will come as you grow in your career, and the networking eventually, just like I got asked to be on this forum, as you grow older into your career, or more, as you grow up on the ladder, you get there. Thank you.
I wanted to add to that in my experience working at the post-secondary level, I've been in situations where I've had the opportunity to apply and interview for certain positions, but the lack of either a graduate degree or a doctoral degree has really prevented me to be qualified for it. So from my perspective, education qualifies you for the position that you're applying for. Your experience really gives you the foundation to be best prepared to be successful in that role. And then your network really provides the opportunity. So I think it's kind of like a three-legged stool. Without all three of those components, sometimes it's really difficult to get that position that you're really striving for. I had the opportunity at my first higher education institution to actually be dean, but at the time I didn't have my master's degree. So like I said, my network provided that opportunity, but unfortunately my education at the time prevented me from qualifying from that. So.
Okay, thank you. As we move into our last question, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But for all of my wonderful panelists, what is your next professionally? What is your next? It could be next idea of position. It could be next thing you want to learn. It could be next anything. What is your next? Or are you in your next?
I'm currently working on my next. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Houston, and my initial research topic is a community college bachelor's degree programs. I'm very passionate about those programs because I feel that they're the next iteration of CTE at the post-secondary level, because most of the nation's community college bachelor's degree programs are really centered around workforce programs that don't duplicate the traditional four-year degrees at four-year institutions. And I would like to leverage that to be able to continue to offer students at the community college and technical college level additional opportunities in CTE, not just to get their certification or a two-year associate's degree, but really to be able to take it to the next level and get that four-year bachelor's degree. So whether that's at my current institution or at a different institution, once I finish my research and get that credential to be able to step into a higher role to help students be able to achieve additional success in CTE.
Sounds good.
I am in my next, but I do have a next coming up. I was put into this position to recruit, retain, and improve teaching in the K-12 and post-secondary two-year colleges in North Dakota. And that is what I'm doing, and I absolutely love it. And I still take professional development that allows me to do my job better. However, I'm a short timer. My wife retired last year, and I am looking to retire. I've had some reasons right now I can't, but in 3 to 4 years, I will retire. And my next trick is going to be a food truck. I would love traveling around to county fairs and selling my wares to people that will listen to me speak. And those of you who know me know I've got two loves, speaking and food. I also make wine and jams and jelly. So that is my next love and my next career. Whether my wife loves it or not, I'm going to do that.
I will say my next is yet to be determined. But I think it's something that I'm going to be passionate about, that I'm going to love. It's going to be something that I find purpose in, that I'm able to use my God-given talents. And it's something of power where I'll be able to affect change and have a broad impact. Because I do everything for the next generation in my little, so that they have a better tomorrow. And whatever that looks like, education, community, all of the other.
Thank you.
And quickly, I know we're about to run out of time. I would say I'm in my next, right? So I always say that I'm a values-driven transformational leader. And so I don't take new positions without knowing, kind of having, at least having an idea of I think there needs to be change here, and I think I could do a good job at it. And so I have lots of plans for where I am right now. Just being 1 year in, I'm at the end of restructuring the school. And so it's been a very busy first year. We've gotten a lot done, but much more plans to go. So my next is accomplishing kind of the goals I set out for myself when I took the position.
Well, thank you, Pam, Brittany, Alberto, and Rick. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your journey. And you gave us such great tips on this career laddering, however we want to call it. It is definitely a journey, and I want to thank you. If you're interested in this particular webinar, just know that the next webinar series will be focused on leadership, and we're going to dig even deeper into many of the things that came up today. Just two events I want to highlight. We do have our CTE Summit. Postsecondary is having a presence there, and that's June 27th to 29th in St. Paul. And we have our Postsecondary Summit, which is September 20th to 22nd in Denver. And I hope to see you all there. And thanks for spending time with us today. And I'm just like so excited because I feel like I learned so much from everyone. And I just wish everyone the best as they move forward in their careers and try to balance and pull it all together. Just know you're making a great impact in CTE and you are greatly appreciated and valued. So enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, everyone?
Thank you.
Bye-bye.